Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Fawn Manor, where Roger and I have returned for the Robert E. Howard Show. It's the Robert E. Howard Show once again. And today we're talking about Cimmerian September. Cimmerian September, which is right around the corner. A whole month devoted to reading about Robert E. Howard's greatest creation, Conan, and a celebration of Robert E. Howard himself, the greatest pulp writer of all time. Last year, for Cimmerian September, we read all of Robert E. Howard's original Conan stories. Well, not everybody did, but a lot of people read some Conan, written by Robert E. Howard, last year for Cimmerian September. This year is going to be a little bit different. This year, we are diving into the pastiche fiction which has been written about Conan the Barbarian. Of course, if you've never read the original Conan stories by Robert E. Howard, read those. You should definitely read those. You can get them in this big whopping volume. This is the Complete Chronicles of Conan. You can also get the great 3-volume set from Del Rey. Both excellent choices for reading all of Conan's adventures as originally written by Robert E. Howard in the order that he originally wrote them. He did not write the Conan stories in chronological order. They skipped around a bit in Conan's lifetime. Actually began when Conan was a king. The first story took place when Conan was already a king towards the latter half of his life. And then, jumps forward to when Conan was a young thief. So, no, it wasn't written in chronological order, the Conan adventures. Amazing stuff. Robert E. Howard's greatest creation, Conan. I think this is his best work. There are some Robert E. Howard fans who disagree with me, but I think Conan is far and away his best work. And if you haven't read it, you should read it. But for those of you who have already read all of those stories, we're going to explore some pastiche fiction, which is still being published today. This just came out recently, Conan, City of the Dead. This was published by Titan Books, and they've published some other Conan pastiche stuff. And they also are currently publishing the Conan comic book. Again, that's something you could read. You could read any of Conan's comic book adventures or any other pastiche story or novel about Conan. I am doing something a little bit different. I am reading Conan pastiche, but I'm also reading it all mixed up with Robert E. Howard's original Conan. Because for people of my generation, that's how most of us first experienced Conan. Nowadays, as it should be, I think most new readers to Conan read Robert E. Howard's original stories because they are pretty available now. But that wasn't the case when I was a young person discovering Conan. I originally discovered Conan through the Marvel Comics and later the film with Arnold Schwarzenegger and the books. But the books I had were these books. They were the books originally published in paperback from Lancer and then republished by Ace Books. Now, this is a series of 12 books which tell the story of Conan's life chronologically, edited by L. Sprague de Camp. And controversially, L. Sprague de Camp wrote a bunch of pastiche Conan fiction, and he got his pal, Lin Carter, to write some other Conan pastiche fiction, and they mixed it all up with Robert E. Howard's original Conan fiction to pad out the Conan saga and make it last 12 books. And that way, L. Sprague de Camp would get more money. This, like I say, was a controversial decision. And I've always hated it. I've always hated that decision was made. I have nothing against Conan pastiche fiction. but I don't think you should mix it up with Robert E. Howard's original fiction. That's just not the way to present the stories. Now, a lot of people do have fond memories of these books. I was just watching a video from Grammaticus, the fantastic booktube channel Grammaticus, where Grammaticus talks about one of the books in this series. And he talks about how, he has fond memories of this series, fond feelings about this series, because it did introduce a lot of people to Conan, and it helped introduce the world to Conan. Conan became popular because of this series of books and the series of covers by Frank Frazetta. Frank Frazetta just did amazing covers for these books. That did a lot too. I've always said that what they should have done, what would have been proper, is that the Robert E. Howard stories should have been presented first. You could have had a series of 5 or 6 paperback books written by Robert E. Howard of strictly the Conan material. That Conan material written by Robert E. Howard, the original stuff. That's how it should have been presented. It also should have been presented as he originally wrote them in that order, but you could have presented them if you wanted to in some kind of chronological order, fine. If you want to make a saga out of it, but definitely you should have had Robert E. Howard's work stand alone. And then, if you wanted to add to the series, fine. You could put out pastiche fiction, but make sure Robert E. Howard's work stands alone. Robert E. Howard created this character, and no one can write this character like Robert E. Howard could. And I remember that being fairly obvious from reading these books. But, they wanted to make a 12-volume saga out of it. Fine. But you know what happened after that? They just went back in time in Conan's career anyway, because then they came out with this. And had more Conan pastiche fiction come out. Like I said, that's fine. But Robert E. Howard's work should stand alone. Nevertheless, this series, from Lancer and then Ace, that's how most people, of my generation at least, encountered Conan for the first time. And as a viewer pointed out to me in one of the innumerable videos where I've commented on this, as a viewer pointed out, when was the last time you even read these stories? Maybe you shouldn't judge them so harshly if you haven't read them forever. And it's true, I haven't read these books, this series of books, in decades. I haven't read them since at least the 1980s, probably. Maybe 90, 91 would be the latest I would have read any of these books. Because I am a Robert E. Howard purist. I think his Conan is the only real Conan. As entertaining as the other books might be. But, it's true. I haven't read these books since that time, so perhaps I shouldn't be so quick to judge the quality of the stories and how these stories were presented. Now, L. Sprague de Camp was a fairly well-known science fiction writer who also wrote some fantasy. Lin Carter is best known as being kind of a hack. He was a really good editor. He edited the Valentine adult fantasy series, which was magnificent. And he was a pretty good editor. You have to give him that. His fiction, however, tended to be a little derivative. But it was fun. Lin Carter's fun. And, this is my favorite Lin Carter book. This has the first 2 Callisto books. It also has a repurposed Steranko cover. But Callisto was a series of books that Lin Carter did that strongly resembled Edgar Rice Burroughs' Martian series. But this is probably my favorite one out of all the trashy stuff that Lin Carter wrote. And, his stuff is fun. You have to give it to him. He wrote some entertaining stories. He also wrote some stories that were just absolutely awful, but, it's good, trashy fun. And if you're reading stuff for Garbogist right now, the reading event that's going on right now, Garbogist, Give Lin Carter a try. He's absolutely appropriate. But Lin Carter wrote some stuff in this series as well. And I haven't read this stuff forever. So for Cimmerian September this year, that's what I'm going to do. It's going to be a little tricky, though, for me personally, just because this is the series right here. 12 paperback books. And for September, I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be out of the country for the last 2 weeks of September. Because I'm going to be in Switzerland, and then I'm going to be in Italy part of the time. So I'm not even going to be here in stately Vaughan Manor. So I have to try to read as much of this stuff in the first 2 weeks of September, and I'm probably going to start late August, actually, just so I don't have to carry too much of this stuff on the planes. We'll see. But it starts off with this. This is the first book. This is Conan. It's just titled Conan. Now, this initial volume has stuff from Robert E. Howard, L. Sprague de Camp, and Lin Carter. And it gives you the author on the title page there so you know what you're reading. This has half of the Hyborian Age, which is an essay that Robert E. Howard wrote about Conan's world. The first story isn't even by Robert E. Howard in this series. The first story is The Thing in the Crypt by Carter and de Camp. That's the first story. So you don't even get a Robert E. Howard story to start things off. Then we have The Tower of the Elephant, because chronologically, that would be the first story, I suppose. Then we have The Hall of the Dead, which de Camp wrote a story based on a synopsis, an unpublished synopsis that Robert E. Howard wrote. Then we have two Robert E. Howard stories, The God in the Bowl and Rogues in the House. Then we have The Hand of Nurgle by Howard and Carter, and The City of Skulls by Carter and de Camp. Now, I can't remember if The Hand of Nurgle was based on a story that was a non-Conan story that de Camp turned into a Conan story, because he did that a few times, or if that was another one that was based on a synopsis. I'm not sure, and I won't know probably until I read it. But that's the first book. The second book, Conan of Cimmeria, another fantastic Frank Frazetta cover. Look at that. That is just beautiful. It's just a beautiful cover. It's no wonder these books were popular, just from the covers alone. And this one starts off with de Camp and Carter, The Curse of the Monolith. Then we have The Bloodstained God. I'm pretty sure that is taken from an historical story, a non-Conan story, which de Camp turned into a Conan story. It was originally by Robert E. Howard, but it wasn't a Conan story. Then we have The Frost Giant's Daughter, which is a great story. The Lair of the Ice Worm by de Camp and Carter. Queen of the Black Coast by Robert E. Howard. The Veil of Lost Women by Robert E. Howard. Then we have something called The Castle of Terror, which I do not remember at all, by de Camp and Carter. Then The Snout in the Dark, which is by Howard, de Camp, and Carter. So I don't know. Probably that actually might be based on an unpublished fragment from Robert E. Howard. Again, I won't know until I read it. It's been so long since I've read these books that some of the de Camp and Carter stuff I just don't remember. Then we have Conan the Freebooter, which is the third volume. This has a Boris Vallejo cover, and a really, really good one. Excellent Boris cover for Conan the Freebooter. Now, this one does not have Lin Carter in it. It just has Robert E. Howard and L. Sprague de Camp. Has Hawks over Shem by Robert E. Howard and L. Sprague de Camp. That was an historical story written by Robert E. Howard that was turned into a Conan story. Then Black Colossus by Robert E. Howard. That was a great story. Shadows in the Moonlight by Robert E. Howard. The Road of the Eagles by Robert E. Howard and L. Sprague de Camp. Again, historical story rewritten by de Camp to turn it into a Conan story. And then we have A Witch Shall Be Born. A Witch Shall Be Born. Great Robert E. Howard story. So there's a lot of Robert E. Howard in this one. Then Conan the Wanderer. Another excellent Boris cover. Robert E. Howard, L. Sprague de Camp, and Lin Carter's back in this one. Black Tears by L. Sprague de Camp and Lin Carter. Then we have Shadows in Zamboula by Robert E. Howard. The Devil in Iron by Robert E. Howard, and The Flame Knife by Robert E. Howard and L. Sprague de Camp. The Flame Knife. I think that might have been that might be a rewritten El Borak story. El Borak is a desert adventurer that Robert E. Howard wrote quite a bit about. Excellent character. I think that might be an El Borak story, but again, I won't know until I read it. This does have a pretty cool map. This series does have a pretty cool map at the beginning. Conan the Adventurer follows that. Look at that. That's awesome. Another great Frazetta cover. Man, this guy could do a cover. People of the Black Circle, The Slithering Shadow, Drums of Tumbalku, and The Pool of the Black One. So, Drums of Tumbalku is printed here in this book for the first time. This is an outline and a rough draft that was turned into a full story by L. Sprague de Camp. Again, another volume with no Lin Carter in it. Then we have an original novel by L. Sprague de Camp and Lin Carter, and this is the book that Grammaticus just talked about. So if you want to know more about this book, you could watch his video. I remember this not being all that good. Grammaticus says it's good. I don't remember it being particularly great, but I'm going to give it another chance this September. So we'll see. We'll see. It's been, literally I haven't read this in decades, so I shouldn't judge it. Excellent cover. Excellent cover. I shouldn't judge it, but I'm kind of judging it. Well, we'll see. I'll read it again and see. That's followed by Conan the Warrior. Now, every story in Conan the Warrior is a Robert E. Howard story. So that's cool. Finally, a volume with only Robert E. Howard. And I think there's only 3 stories in here. Yeah, Red Nails, Jewels of Gwalior, and Beyond the Black River. So, excellent stories. Red Nails and Beyond the Black River are 2 of the greatest Conan stories. So, this is an excellent volume right there. Then we get Conan the Usurper. I got 2 copies of Conan the Usurper here. So, Conan the Usurper. And Conan the Usurper, I'll use this copy. Look at that great cover. That's fantastic. That's got to be from the Scarlet Citadel. Has got to be in this volume. So let's take a look. Yeah, The Treasure of Tranikos is the first story. Now, The Treasure of Tranikos is a story called The Black Stranger. It was originally written under the title The Black Stranger, which was a Conan story. But L. Sprague de Camp came and edited the hell out of it, from what I remember. He edited the hell out of The Black Stranger and turned it into The Treasure of Tranikos. So, we'll see how it is. Wolves Beyond the Border is the second story. Again, that was, I think it was half an outline or half a synopsis that Robert E. Howard wrote that was turned into a story. Then we have The Phoenix on the Sword and The Scarlet Citadel, both stories of Conan when he was a king. So this volume basically is all about Conan becoming the king of Samaria. He becomes the king of Samaria in this volume. And then we get Conan the Conqueror, which is entirely written by Robert E. Howard with some editing, unnecessary editing by L. Sprague de Camp. This was originally called The Hour of the Dragon. It was Robert E. Howard's only full-length Conan novel. The only full-length Conan novel that Robert E. Howard wrote. And it was excellent. Just an excellent, excellent book. Has an excellent, excellent cover by Frank Frazetta. That's magnificent. This guy could paint some covers, man. Conan the Conqueror, or The Hour of the Dragon. That is followed by Conan the Avenger. Conan the Avenger. So this has what's in here? What's in here? So there's only a little bit of Robert E. Howard in this series from this point. This was the end as far as Robert E. Howard was concerned, writing Conan. This is the last Conan story chronologically, and this set tells his adventures chronologically. So what we have in here is the return of Conan by Bjorn Nyberg, or Bjorn Nyberg. I really don't know much about Bjorn Nyberg, except that he wrote this Conan story, The Return of Conan. So we have The Return of Conan, and then we have The Hyborian Age Part 2 by Robert E. Howard. So the second half of the essay that Robert E. Howard wrote about Conan's world is in Conan the Avenger, a.k.a. The Return of Conan by Bjorn Nyberg and L. Sprague de Camp. Excellent cover. Have to give it that. I remember almost nothing about this. I really don't remember much about this book. I could say that about the next two books, really. Here's Conan of Aquilonia, another really cool Boris cover. You know this is Old Man Conan because he's got his beard. He grew his beard out when he was an old man king. Conan of Aquilonia, which is a novel. Am I correct? No, it actually has 4 stories in it. The Witch of the Mists, Black Sphinx of Nebthu, Red Moon of Zimbabwe, and Shadows in the Skull. All very Robert E. Howard sounding stories, but it's all by L. Sprague de Camp and Lin Carter. Don't remember anything about this book, so we'll see how it is. Now, the last book in this original series was Conan of the Isles. And unfortunately, I do not have an edition with the Boris Vallejo cover, which I remember being pretty good. This is an older cover because this is the original Lancer edition of Conan of the Isles. Does it even say who did this cover? It probably won't. It doesn't. Somebody out there knows. Remind me who did this original cover for Conan of the Isles, from the 12th book in the saga of Conan. So this is the end of the saga, chronologically. We've come to the end in a story written by L. Sprague de Camp and Lin Carter, and it is a novel. I remember this being pretty stupid. I remember it feeling just not... It didn't feel like a Robert E. Howard story at all to me from what I remember reading it. But like I said, it's been a long, long time since I've read this. I will judge it next month when I finally get to it. Probably while I'm in Italy. I'll probably be reading this in Italy and they're going to be like, what the hell are you reading? I'm reading Conan of the Isles. That's what I'm reading. So we'll see. We'll see how DeCamp and Carter wrap it up. Now, of course, they just continued on, like I said, with a series of Bantam books, some of which were written by Lin Carter, L. Sprague de Camp, and this one has Bjorn Nyberg in it too. Yeah, and that Bjorn guy, he's in here also with Conan. That's Conan right there. It looks a little bit like Conan the Emaciated, but that's Conan. For Conan the Swordsman. So yeah, and then Bantam had a series of books, and then there was some illustrated books, I think from Ace, or am I misremembering that? And then we got the Tor series of books. Then we got Tor. A whole seemingly never-ending series of pastiche novels that were published by Tor. Some of those were great, some of those were not so great, and some of them were okay. So, yeah, that's that. And I will be reading these. Let me know what you will be reading for Cimmerian September, and I will catch you next time.